This could be the biggest driver swap in modern Formula One, and it is already being set up behind the scenes, because Red Bull has officially targeted Oscar Piastri. Max Verstappen's future is suddenly in doubt, and McLaren has quietly positioned itself to take advantage of the chaos. For critical signals, all confirmed inside the paddock, are pointing to the exact same outcome: Verstappen's growing frustration with the sport, Red Bull preparing for his exit, a key Verstappen figure already moving to McLaren, and Piastri himself not closing the door on a move. And here is the part that changes everything. This would not be a normal transfer. This would be a direct swap between two top teams, something so rare that when it happens, it reshapes the entire balance of power in Formula One. But the real story is not just who moves. It is why all of this is happening at the same time, and who is already making decisions behind closed doors. It all begins just after Miami, but the real story never happened during the race. Because while everyone was focused on results, something much more important was happening behind the scenes, quietly, almost unnoticed. Within days, two of the most respected sources in Formula One released the same information at the same time. Red Bull had already identified Oscar Piastri as their #1 target if Max Verstappen leaves. That kind of timing is not coincidence. In Formula One, when multiple top sources align like that, it usually means one thing: the conversation has already happened. And that is where the tension begins. Because Red Bull is not a team that casually prepares for life after Verstappen. Everything in that team is built around him. The car, the strategy, the entire structure has been designed for one driver. So if they are openly looking at replacements, it means they believe losing him is a real possibility. And that changes everything. Because Verstappen's situation is no longer stable. His frustration has been building for months. Not just with performance, but with the direction of the sport itself. The new regulations, the feel of the cars, the way racing is evolving. This is not a temporary issue. This is deeper. Imagine being at the very top, winning championships, dominating races, and still feeling disconnected from the sport you are competing in. That is where Verstappen is right now. And when a driver reaches that point, the decision is no longer just about staying competitive. It becomes about staying motivated. But here is where things become even more serious. Red Bull is not waiting for that decision to happen. They are already reacting to it. And they did not choose just any driver. They chose Piastri. Young, precise, calm under pressure, and capable of leading a team long-term. That choice is not random. It is a calculated move toward a future that might arrive sooner than expected. And the moment that decision became public, it sent a message across the entire paddock. Red Bull is preparing for change. But at the same time, that preparation might create a problem much bigger than they expected. But the moment McLaren made their move, the entire situation escalated. Because while Red Bull was quietly preparing for a future without Verstappen, McLaren did something that directly connects to him. They signed Gianpiero Lambiase. And this is where the story shifts. Because Lambiase is not just another engineer changing teams. He is the voice Verstappen hears in every critical moment of a race. The person who understands exactly how he thinks, how he reacts under pressure, how to get the absolute maximum out of him. That kind of connection is not replaceable. It is built over years, through championships, through high-stakes decisions where one message can decide everything. Now that connection is no longer inside Red Bull. It is inside McLaren. And that is not just a detail. That is a signal. Because when a team brings in someone like that, they are not just improving their structure. They are building familiarity. They are creating an environment that already fits a specific driver, before that driver even arrives. McLaren publicly downplayed the move. They positioned it as part of their normal growth, part of strengthening the team. But inside the paddock, that explanation does not fully convince anyone. Because the timing is too perfect. At the exact moment Verstappen's future becomes uncertain, the one person who understands him best moves to McLaren. That is not random. That is alignment. And once you see that, a new question becomes unavoidable. If Verstappen leaves Red Bull, where does he go? Which team already has the structure, the trust, the key connection he relies on? Suddenly, McLaren is not just an option. It becomes the most logical destination. But that creates a serious problem. Because McLaren is not waiting for a driver. They already have two. And one of them is now directly in danger. Oscar Piastri. So what started as a Red Bull situation is now turning into a McLaren crisis. Because if Verstappen arrives, something has to change. And that change will not be small. And this is where the pressure inside McLaren stops being theoretical and becomes real. Because having two top drivers is only an advantage until it isn't. From the outside, it looks like the perfect situation. Two incredibly fast drivers, both capable of winning, both pushing the team forward. But inside Formula One, that balance never lasts forever. At some point, a decision has to be made. Who is the future? Because you can support two drivers, but you cannot build everything around both. And right now, that balance is starting to shift. Lando Norris has momentum. He has results, confidence, and most importantly, the trust of the team in decisive moments. Oscar Piastri, on the other hand, is just as talented, but his role feels less defined. And that difference creates something dangerous. Doubt. Not public doubt, not something you hear on the radio, but internal. The kind that builds slowly when a driver starts asking one simple question. Am I the one they are building around, or am I waiting? Now this is where another key figure enters the story. Mark Webber. Not just a manager, but someone who knows Red Bull from the inside, how they operate, how they commit fully to a driver when they choose one. And according to what is being said in the paddock, he is not completely satisfied with how things are evolving at McLaren. That does not mean conflict. It means awareness. Awareness that if Piastri stays in this structure, his path to becoming a clear number one driver is uncertain. And in Formula One, uncertainty is risk. Now compare that to what Red Bull is offering. A team preparing for a new leader. A clean structure. A chance to become the center of everything. Suddenly, the decision is not just about performance. It is about control. And here is the detail that changes everything. Piastri has already made it clear, carefully but clearly, that he would be open to joining Red Bull if a seat becomes available. That is not hesitation. That is positioning. Keeping options open, while everything else starts moving around him. Now connect all the pieces. Red Bull wants Piastri. Piastri is open to Red Bull. Verstappen is uncertain. McLaren is quietly preparing for a scenario they cannot fully control. At this point, this is no longer just a possibility. It is a structure under pressure. And when that pressure builds long enough, something always breaks. And this is where the entire situation explodes beyond just two teams, because once one piece moves, everything else follows. If Verstappen leaves Red Bull, that is not just a driver change. That is the collapse of the system they have built for years. Everything in that team has been designed around him. The car philosophy, the way they approach race weekends, the way decisions are made under pressure. Remove that, and Red Bull does not just need a replacement. They need a complete reset. And that is exactly why Piastri is so important. He is not just fast. He is the type of driver you can build a new era around. Calm, precise, consistent, and capable of handling pressure without losing control. But here is where it becomes even more intense. Because on the other side, McLaren does not just gain a driver if Verstappen arrives. They inherit a completely different reality. Because Verstappen does not join a team to grow slowly. He joins to win immediately. That changes everything. It changes expectations. It changes internal pressure. It changes how the entire team operates from day one. McLaren would go from building something to being expected to deliver instantly. And that kind of shift is never clean. It forces decisions. It creates tension inside the garage. Because two drivers cannot exist in that environment without a clear hierarchy. One becomes the center. The other becomes the question. And that is where the ripple effect begins. Because if Piastri leaves for Red Bull, that opens a seat. If Verstappen joins McLaren, that reshapes their entire structure. And suddenly, other drivers start watching, waiting, calculating. Carlos Sainz is already one of the names linked to potential openings if this chain reaction begins. Now the story is no longer about Verstappen and Piastri. It becomes a domino effect across the entire grid. One move triggering another. One decision forcing the next. And all of it depends on a single moment that has not happened yet. Verstappen's final choice. Because until that decision is made, everything remains unstable. Teams are preparing. Drivers are positioning themselves. Opportunities are forming quietly. And the second that decision becomes real, the entire grid shifts. Not gradually. All at once. And now everything comes down to the moment that will decide the future, not just for these two drivers, but for two of the biggest teams in Formula One. Because no matter how many signals we have seen, no matter how perfectly the pieces seem to fit, none of this becomes real until one decision is made. Max Verstappen. That is the center of everything. Because Red Bull can prepare for Piastri, McLaren can quietly build the environment around him. Piastri can keep his options open, but until Verstappen decides what he wants, the entire situation remains on edge. Waiting. And here is what makes this so unpredictable. This is not just a decision about performance. It is about direction. Because Verstappen is not simply asking which car is faster. He is questioning the future of the sport itself. The regulations, the way the cars feel, the entire experience of racing going forward. So his choice is not just competitive. It is personal. Stay, and trust that Red Bull can rebuild around him. Leave, and step into a completely new project with McLaren. Or walk away from Formula One entirely. And that last option is the one that makes the situation so volatile. Because if Red Bull cannot convince him that the future is worth staying for, then everything opens. But at the same time, McLaren is facing a different kind of pressure. They need to secure Piastri. Not just with a contract, but with a clear future. Because this is not about money. It is about control. If Piastri feels that his path depends on waiting, sharing priority, or adapting to another driver's project, then Red Bull becomes more than an opportunity. It becomes certainty. A team ready to build everything around him. A role with no ambiguity. And this is where both situations collide. Because if Red Bull cannot hold Verstappen, and McLaren cannot fully convince Piastri to stay, then this is no longer a complex negotiation. It becomes something much simpler. A natural exchange. One driver moves out. Another steps in. Perfectly aligned with everything that has been building behind the scenes. And when that moment arrives, it will not feel sudden. It will feel inevitable. Because every signal we have seen, every move, every carefully chosen word, has been pointing in the same direction from the very beginning. This was never just a rumor. It was a process. Slow, controlled, and building toward one outcome. So now the real question is no longer whether this shocking swap could happen. It is this. When the moment comes, who will take control of the future, and who will realize too late that it was already decided without them?